It started like any other quiet day in the peaceful town of Santa Fe, New Mexico. The sky was clear, the sun was soft, and there was nothing unusual in the air. But hidden behind tall trees and long driveways stood a large, quiet mansion that once belonged to a man the world used to know very well. Gene Hackman, a Hollywood legend, had been living away from the spotlight for many years. Most people had forgotten about him. He had retired from acting, stopped giving interviews, and didn't show up at any red carpets or events. He simply disappeared from public life. People who lived nearby rarely saw him. If they did, it was only at the grocery store or maybe during a short morning walk. No one knew what he did inside his house. And honestly, no one cared, until something happened. What many didn't know was that the mansion had a history. It wasn't just a beautiful home in the hills. It had been custom designed, large and quiet, with thick walls and old wood that creaked when you walked. Some said it felt more like a place built to hide something, not just to live in. But no one really asked questions. It was Gene Hackman's house, and that was enough. A man like him deserved his privacy. Then one morning, black SUVs slowly pulled up near the property. There were men in suits, quiet and serious, with no smiles and no small talk. They looked at each other, then moved quickly toward the gates. Someone rang the bell. The security camera turned slightly, and for a few seconds nothing happened. Then the gate opened. What happened next? Only a few people know in full detail, but part of the story began to leak, and that's when things started to get strange. The FBI didn't just visit. They had a reason. They had been looking into something for a while. A strange lead had brought them to this house. Maybe a phone call, maybe an old document. No one outside the investigation could say for sure. But what we do know is that they were sure enough to knock on the door of a man who had stayed away from the world for over a decade. And when the FBI gets involved, it's never for something small. Neighbors stood quietly behind their windows. Some filmed with their phones. A few local reporters tried to get close, but the road was blocked. Inside the mansion, agents began to search. They didn't speak to the press, they didn't answer questions, but their faces said everything. They were not there for nothing. Something had brought them here. And whatever it was still inside. That's when people started asking, what could Gene Hackman possibly be hiding? He wasn't a man known for scandals. In fact, he was the opposite, a respected actor. A quiet man. No major gossip, no big controversies. He had won awards, played heroes and villains, and then he left it all behind. So why this? Why now? The mansion itself became a point of interest. People who had seen it from the outside described it as peaceful but distant. Some said it looked almost too private, too hidden. There were rumors about secret rooms, about strange deliveries years ago, but no one had proof. Now the idea that something serious had been hidden inside those walls was no longer a theory, it was a possibility. And the curiosity around it started to grow fast. The internet exploded with questions. Some people made wild guesses. Others tried to dig into old news, old interviews, anything that could give them a clue. Some said it was nothing, just a mistake. But others weren't so sure. Why would the FBI come all this way for nothing? They could have sent a letter, made a phone call, but they didn't. They came in person. That's not something they do every day. Inside the mansion, agents were said to have searched carefully, not just the living room and bedrooms, but the basement, the attic, even behind walls. They spent hours there. One report claimed they carried out a few sealed boxes. No one could see what was inside. No one said a word, but the look on their faces, focused, tight, serious, told a story of its own. Some people remembered a strange moment from years ago. A small interview where Hackman was asked about his time in the military before he became an actor. He smiled, then said, "There are some things I don't talk about." At the time it sounded like a joke. Now it didn't. The house remained silent after the search. No one came in. No one came out. But the story was alive now. People wanted answers. Who gave the FBI the tip? What was found inside? And most of all, why was Gene Hackman, of all people, suddenly at the center of this mystery? Even though nothing had been confirmed, the questions only grew louder. Every news story added a new piece, a new theory. But the truth, that stayed behind those walls. For now the mansion stood quiet again, just like before. But things had changed. People would never look at that house, or at Gene Hackman, the same way again. Gene Hackman, once one of Hollywood's biggest stars, had chosen a path that most famous people would never dare to take. He left it all behind. The glitz, the glamour, the flashing cameras and the fame. For someone who had played so many memorable characters, it seemed almost impossible that the world would forget him. But Hackman had other plans. He wasn't interested in the movie business anymore, or the fame that came with it. Instead, he decided to live the kind of life most people only dream about. A quiet life, far away from the noise of the city and the chaos of the spotlight. In the late 1990s, Gene Hackman quietly stepped away from acting. He made the decision to retire in a way that shocked the entertainment industry. Hackman had already achieved so much in his career. He had won 2 Academy Awards, received multiple Golden Globe nominations, and starred in a string of successful movies, including The French Connection and Unforgiven. He had reached the peak of his career, but instead of continuing to chase new roles, new projects, and the spotlight, Hackman simply walked away. It was the kind of decision that not many people could understand, especially considering how much he was loved by his fans. To them it felt like he just vanished overnight. Hackman moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and bought a large mansion in the quiet hills. The town was small and peaceful, the perfect place for someone looking to escape the world's attention. His decision to leave Hollywood was a reflection of his personality, a man who had always valued his privacy. While other actors might have soaked up the fame, Hackman wasn't interested in that life anymore. He wasn't someone who craved the public's approval. Instead, he found peace in the slower pace of life in Santa Fe. The streets were calm, the people were friendly, and the atmosphere was a far cry from the hustle of Los Angeles. But despite this peaceful setting, there was always something that seemed a little mysterious about Hackman's life in Santa Fe. People who lived near him rarely saw him out and about. He wasn't one to run errands or make public appearances. It was as if he was determined to live as quietly as possible. Of course, neighbors still spoke about him from time to time. They would mention that they'd seen him walking his dog or shopping for groceries, but those moments were few and far between. Hackman had managed to keep his life out of the public eye. The celebrity buzz that once followed him everywhere seemed to have completely disappeared. It was in this environment of isolation that Gene Hackman built his new life. He had no need for a publicist or anyone to manage his image. There were no paparazzi following him around, no red carpets or award shows to attend. Instead, he spent his time reading, walking, and enjoying the beauty of the surrounding desert landscapes. The quiet life that he had always dreamed of was now his reality. But as peaceful as it seemed on the surface, there was always the question of what lay behind the gates of his mansion. What was Hackman doing in his own private world? Was it truly just a retirement of relaxation, or was there something more to his sudden withdrawal from public life? There were a few clues, but nothing that would answer the question directly. Hackman did occasionally appear in the news, but it was rarely for anything significant. He was still respected in Hollywood, but he never sought out new work. The most attention he received in the years after his retirement came from a rare interview or a passing mention in the media, but even then, he wasn't the type to give interviews about his personal life. Most of what was known about Hackman during this time came from old friends, colleagues, and a few personal accounts from neighbors. Yet no one ever got too close to the truth. Hackman had built a wall around himself, one that no one seemed able to get through, and that was exactly how he wanted it. For those who were curious about his life, it seemed like a dream come true, living without the pressures of fame. But for others, Hackman's decision to stay so hidden felt like something wasn't quite right. Was he really just enjoying his retirement, or was there something more to his story that he wasn't sharing? Could the sudden decision to leave everything behind have been part of a deeper, more personal reason? The more people tried to figure it out, the more questions they had. Hackman's life in Santa Fe remained calm and quiet for many years, but things began to shift when the FBI arrived. The agents didn't just show up for any ordinary reason. They had a tip, something that led them to believe that there was more to Hackman's life than he had ever shared with the world. The fact that it was the FBI, and not just local authorities, only added to the mystery. After all, why would federal agents be interested in a retired actor who had kept to himself for so long? What could he possibly be hiding, if anything? The sudden appearance of the FBI raised even more questions than it answered. Hackman's reclusive life had always been something that intrigued people, even if they didn't know exactly why. The actor's decision to step away from the spotlight had been a choice that many admired. It was rare for someone to retire while still at the top of their, but the sudden involvement of the FBI suggested that there was more to Hackman's life than met the eye. As people began to speculate, the curiosity around Hackman's quiet life grew even stronger. Was he living out his golden years in peace, or was something else going on behind the scenes? The FBI's investigation into his mansion turned everything on its head. The questions that had lingered for years about Hackman's life were suddenly brought to the forefront. People wanted to know why this quiet, respected man had suddenly become the center of attention once again. The peaceful life that Hackman had worked so hard to build was now overshadowed by the mystery that had been uncovered. And while the full details of what the FBI had found remained hidden, the questions continued to grow, leaving everyone wondering what had really been going on behind those closed doors for all these years. It was an ordinary morning in Santa Fe when everything suddenly changed. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and life seemed to be moving along just as it had for years. But then, without warning, a black SUV rolled slowly down the quiet street that Gene Hackman called home. It was the kind of thing that no one really paid attention to at first. After all, Santa Fe was a place where strange things didn't happen every day. People didn't expect the FBI to show up at anyone's door, especially not the door of a retired actor who had kept his life private for so long. But when that SUV stopped in front of Hackman's mansion, it marked the beginning of a mystery that no one could have predicted. The agents who stepped out of the car were quiet, focused, and serious. They didn't speak to anyone. They didn't wave or greet neighbors. They moved like people who had a job to do and knew exactly how to do it. No one knew what was going on, and no one had expected this moment to arrive. Hackman, who had lived in near-complete silence for years, now found himself at the center of a huge investigation. But why? What could possibly bring the FBI to the doorstep of a man who had stayed so far out of the public eye? The neighborhood quickly began to buzz with questions. Hackman's life had always been private, and now it was suddenly the subject of intense curiosity. The mystery surrounding his mansion had only deepened. What was the FBI looking for? Why did they need to search his home? Was it something serious, something dangerous, or just a mistake? The speculation spread quickly through the small town. People who had never thought much about Hackman's quiet life were now asking questions they had never thought to ask before. It was the kind of thing that could make anyone feel uneasy. How could a man who had lived so quietly for so long suddenly find himself under such intense scrutiny? The agents didn't give any answers to the media. They didn't speak to the press. They didn't confirm or deny anything. They simply moved in and out of the mansion, conducting their search without saying a word. To the outside world, it seemed almost as if Hackman had become the center of a hidden scandal. But there was still so much no one knew. The questions kept piling up. What were they looking for? What did they expect to find in that mansion? And more importantly, why had the FBI gotten involved at all? As the day wore on, rumors began to spread. Some people said it was a routine search, just a misunderstanding. Others were more certain that something serious was going on. Maybe Hackman was involved in something dark. Maybe there was some old secret from his past that had finally caught up to him. The more people tried to understand, the more the mystery grew. It was hard to believe that Gene Hackman, a man known for his respectable career and private life, could be hiding something that would require federal investigation. But then again, this was the FBI, the kind of agency that didn't get involved unless they were sure of something. And if they were at Hackman's mansion, it meant they had reason to be. Inside the mansion, the search continued. Agents moved carefully through each room, looking for anything that might help them understand why they were there. They weren't looking for an actor's past roles or movie scripts. They were looking for something else, something that had nothing to do with his Hollywood career. The investigators searched for hours. They went through the house, upstairs and downstairs, looking in places where no one else had thought to look. And then finally they made a discovery. But the nature of that discovery wasn't made public. The authorities didn't release details. They didn't even tell the press what they had found, leaving the world to guess. All of a sudden, people who had forgotten about Gene Hackman were paying attention again. They wanted to know what had happened, what the FBI had found, and most of all, what it all meant. Was Hackman really hiding something in his mansion? Or had it all just been a misunderstanding? The answers weren't clear, but the questions were louder than ever. The FBI's involvement raised even more speculation about Hackman's past. People began to think back to the actor's earlier days in Hollywood. What did they really know about his life before he became famous? Hackman had been born in a small town and had served in the military before finding his way into the world of acting. What if something from those early years had come back to haunt him? What if there was a secret from his past that had been hiding in plain sight, just waiting to be discovered? Could the FBI have found something related to those years? Something that was far more serious than anyone imagined. Then there were the other questions that no one seemed to have an answer for. How did the FBI know where to look? Who had tipped them off? Someone must have had a reason to believe that there was something hidden in Hackman's mansion. It didn't seem like a random visit. The more people thought about it, the more it felt like there was something more to the story. And yet with each passing hour, the answers remained out of reach. What made the situation even more strange was that Hackman himself didn't say a word. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't make any public statements. The actor who had once been so open to interviews and discussions was now completely silent. It was almost as if he had disappeared from the conversation entirely, leaving everyone else to guess at what was really happening inside that mansion. The mystery around his life, which had always been there, was now at the forefront of everyone's minds. People couldn't stop talking about it. As the search continued, people started to wonder, was this just a story of a retired actor caught in a misunderstanding, or was there something much deeper going on? Was Hackman's past about to catch up with him in a way no one could have expected? Or was this just another case of a private man being misunderstood by the world around him? Only time would tell. But for now, all anyone knew for sure was that the FBI had stepped into Hackman's world, and whatever they were looking for, it was something serious. As the hours passed, the tension around Gene Hackman's mansion grew. Neighbors continued to watch in silence as FBI agents moved in and out, never speaking a word, but their faces told a different story. There was something serious going on inside that mansion, and the more time that passed, the more questions began to pile up. What were they looking for? What had they found? Every person who watched the agents at work could feel it. This wasn't just another routine search. Something big was unfolding, and no one knew exactly what it was. The discovery that the FBI made inside the mansion would turn everything upside down. At first there were only whispers, no one knew the details, but everyone felt the weight of it. People in the neighborhood couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. Hackman's once quiet, peaceful life was now at the center of a storm. The investigation had moved beyond just a search. It had become something else, something far more serious. The FBI had uncovered something that no one had expected. For hours, agents had combed through every inch of the house, searching not just the rooms but the hidden corners where few had dared to look. At first, the authorities remained tight-lipped. They didn't want to give away too much, and they couldn't afford to reveal the truth just yet. But as the day wore on, small pieces of information began to leak out. The house had been searched thoroughly. They had found something behind a wall. A hidden compartment, one that no one had ever known about. What was inside? That was the question that everyone wanted to know, but no one had an answer. Rumors spread quickly. Some said it was a stash of old documents. Others thought it might be something much darker, something that could explain why the FBI had been called in at all. The more the agents searched, the more the story seemed to grow. It wasn't just a simple mistake or misunderstanding. There was something serious going on. The discovery behind that wall seemed to open up a whole new world of questions, and no one could figure out what it meant. What was Gene Hackman hiding? What was he trying to keep secret for all these years? Could it be something from his past, something so shocking that he had to keep it hidden, even after all these years of living quietly in Santa Fe? Some reports began to hint at the nature of what the agents had found, but none of the details were confirmed. The authorities were careful not to say too much, but it was clear that whatever had been discovered was enough to change everything. For people who had known Hackman for years, this was a complete shock. How could a man who had been so respected in Hollywood, someone who had built a career on playing heroes, suddenly become the center of such a disturbing investigation? It didn't add up, and yet the evidence was right in front of them. The FBI had found something hidden, something important, and now the world had to wait to learn exactly what it was. As more and more details started to leak, the shockwaves grew stronger. The FBI hadn't just found something small. It was clear that they had uncovered something that had been deliberately hidden away. Hackman had lived in that mansion for years without anyone suspecting a thing. He had carefully built his life in a way that kept him out of the public eye, and it had worked. Until now. The discovery inside his home was more than just a surprise. It was the key to unraveling a mystery that had been hidden for far too long. But what exactly was the FBI looking for, and what had they found? The questions seemed to multiply with each passing hour. Was it something connected to his career in Hollywood? Perhaps there were old contracts, rare items, or even personal artifacts from his past films. But even that didn't feel like enough to bring the FBI into the picture. No, Whatever they had found was bigger, more significant. Some began to wonder if it was something criminal. Had Gene Hackman been involved in something dangerous, something illegal, that no one had known about? The idea seemed almost impossible to believe, but the presence of the FBI suggested that it was more than just a bad rumor. The fact that the authorities were keeping everything so secret only fueled the fire. The longer they stayed tight-lipped, the more curiosity grew. People who had followed Hackman's career for years now wondered if they had missed something. Had there been signs? Were there moments during his career that hinted at something more? What if Hackman had been leading a double life all along, hiding something dark while presenting himself as a beloved movie star? The questions were endless, and the more people tried to figure it out, the less they knew. One thing was clear. Whatever the FBI had found was far from ordinary. It wasn't just a collection of old keepsakes or something easily explained. The discovery was something that could change everything. But even as the curiosity reached a boiling point, no one had the answers they were searching for. The FBI continued their investigation, but they remained quiet. It was almost as if they were waiting for the right moment to reveal what they had uncovered. Until then, the world had to live with the mystery, trying to put together the pieces of a puzzle that no one had expected to find. The agents worked tirelessly, searching the mansion for clues, and every new moment added more mystery to the story. Hackman's quiet, peaceful life seemed to be falling apart, and people began to wonder, was the man they had thought they knew really the same person they thought he was? The discovery behind the walls of his mansion had changed everything. And the more they learned, the more people realized that this was only the beginning. What the FBI had uncovered was just the start of something much bigger, and no one knew what the final truth would be. The moment that everyone had been waiting for had finally arrived. The mystery surrounding Gene Hackman's mansion, the FBI's involvement, and the shocking discovery made behind the walls of his home were now being revealed to the world. The details, however, were even more astonishing than anyone could have imagined. The information that slowly trickled out about what had been uncovered inside Hackman's home caused a ripple effect, shaking not just the people of Santa Fe, but the entire world. Hackman's private life had been shattered, and the secrets that had been hidden for so long were about to come into the light. For days there had been speculation. The FBI had kept everyone guessing, offering only the smallest hints. The questions about what Hackman had been hiding, why the FBI had gotten involved, and what they had discovered inside his mansion had consumed the media and the public. The longer the secrecy persisted, the more intense the curiosity became, and then piece by piece the answers began to emerge. What the agents had found in Hackman's mansion was far more shocking than anyone had anticipated. The discovery wasn't just about some old items from his past, or even documents that had been carefully hidden away. It was something far darker. It turned out that Hackman's quiet life had been a carefully constructed facade. Behind the walls of his mansion, the FBI uncovered evidence of activities that had nothing to do with acting, fame, or Hollywood. The agents discovered a series of old, forgotten files, documents that traced back years. Some of the materials they found were connected to a part of Hackman's past that no one had ever guessed, his involvement in something far more sinister. Hackman had once been part of a secret network, a group that had been operating under the radar for years. The network was shrouded in mystery, with connections to figures whose names had never been mentioned in public, people who had a much darker reputation than Hackman's own. The discovery of these old classified documents revealed a hidden chapter of Hackman's life, a chapter that he had clearly wanted to keep buried forever. It became clear that his quiet life in Santa Fe had not been about seeking peace or solitude at all. Instead, Hackman had been trying to escape from a past that he thought could never be uncovered. He had spent years hiding from the secrets that had once defined his life. But now those secrets were about to be exposed to the world. As more details emerged, it was revealed that Hackman had been involved in illegal activities during his younger years, activities that he had hoped would stay hidden forever. He had connections to a criminal network, one that was deeply embedded in the underworld of politics, business, and more. The documents that were discovered painted a disturbing picture of a man who had lived two lives, one as the beloved Hollywood actor and another as someone involved in much darker dealings. Hackman's involvement in the network wasn't just some passing association. The documents showed that he had played an active role in several covert operations, some of which had been linked to high-profile figures in both the criminal world and the government. Hackman had been involved in activities that ranged from money laundering to working as a middleman for powerful and dangerous people. For years he had kept this part of his life hidden, hoping that no one would ever connect the dots. But now those dots were coming together, and the truth was out. What made the whole situation even more bizarre was that Hackman's public image had remained so clean. He had always been seen as a respectable actor, a man who had built his career on roles that portrayed him as a hero, a leader, someone who fought for what was right. But behind closed doors he had been living a completely different life. The public had no idea that the man they admired was also hiding secrets that went beyond anything they could have imagined. For those who had followed his career, it was a shocking revelation. How could someone so beloved have lived such a double life without anyone knowing? The more the world learned about Hackman's hidden past, the more questions began to emerge. How had he managed to keep his criminal activities secret for so long? How had he fooled the public, his friends, and even his closest family members? The FBI investigation revealed that Hackman had gone to great lengths to cover his tracks, destroying evidence and hiding connections. He had carefully crafted his public persona to be the complete opposite of what he had really been doing behind the scenes. It was as if the actor had been playing a role his whole life, and the real Hackman had been hidden away for years. People began to wonder if anyone had suspected anything during his Hollywood career. Had his colleagues or fellow actors ever seen signs of the man behind the roles? Had anyone suspected that Hackman wasn't just an actor but someone involved in serious illegal activities? The more people thought about it, the more disturbing the thought became. Hackman had played characters who were tough, cunning, and dangerous. Was that just acting, or had he been using his skills to hide his true nature? It was a chilling thought, and one that sent shockwaves through everyone who had once admired him. But the real shock came when the FBI made a final unexpected revelation. Among the documents they had found were a series of photos that showed Hackman with several key figures from the criminal world. These photos were taken at locations that no one would have ever expected Hackman to be, in dark underground clubs, at private meetings, and at locations linked to illicit activities. The images painted a clear picture of Hackman's connections to these figures, and it became evident that he had been far more involved in the world of crime than anyone had ever realized. Hackman had been living among the shadows, his true life hidden from everyone, even the people closest to him. The FBI's final report made it clear: Gene Hackman's life had been full of secrets, and those secrets were now exposed. The man who had once been the face of Hollywood heroes had been living a double life for decades. The world that had admired him for so long was now forced to reckon with the shocking truth. Hackman's past had come back to haunt him in the worst way possible, and there was no escaping the consequences. As the story continued to unfold, the public tried to come to terms with what they had learned. It was hard to accept that someone so well loved had been hiding something so dark. For many, the discovery of Hackman's secrets was like a punch to the gut. The actor they thought they knew had been living a completely different life, and it was a life that no one could have predicted. Hackman's quiet, peaceful retirement in Santa Fe had been nothing more than a mask, a way to escape the past he had spent years trying to bury. But in the end, even the best mask can't hide the truth forever. The revelations about Gene Hackman's dark past and the shocking discovery made by the FBI had left the world stunned. It wasn't just the news that Hackman had been living a double life that shocked people, but the realization that a man they had once admired for his talent and heroic roles in movies was not who they thought he was. The world watched as his carefully crafted public image crumbled, and what followed was a whirlwind of consequences that no one could have predicted. Hackman's life, once the epitome of quiet retirement, was now the center of a storm that would change everything. The media, always hungry for a story, seized the opportunity to dive deep into Hackman's life. Journalists, eager to uncover even more secrets, began to dig into every corner of his past. They spoke to former colleagues, friends, and even those who had worked with him in Hollywood. What they found was unsettling. It turned out that Hackman had kept his personal life under tight wraps for decades, not just to protect himself, but to protect others as well. But now, with the truth exposed, the floodgates were open. People began to question everything they had known about him. One of the most shocking things that emerged in the aftermath was the impact of Hackman's actions on his family. For years, Hackman had kept his criminal ties a secret, not only from the public, but also from the people closest to him. His wife, his children, and even his closest friends were all blindsided by the news. They had no idea that the man they loved and trusted had been hiding such a dangerous and troubling past. Hackman's family was left to pick up the pieces, struggling to come to terms with the man they thought they knew, who had now been revealed as something completely different. His wife especially faced the hardest challenge. She had been married to Hackman for decades, and had never once suspected that the man she loved could be hiding such dark secrets. The shock of learning that her husband had been involved in criminal activities, some of them incredibly dangerous, left her devastated. She found herself torn between the man she had loved for so long and the person he had secretly been. It was a betrayal unlike anything she had ever imagined, and the emotional toll it took on her was immense. She had to deal with not only the shock of the discovery, but the reality of what it meant for her future. The fallout didn't stop with his family. Hackman's reputation in Hollywood also took a massive hit. The actor who had once been seen as a respected figure in the entertainment industry was now under a cloud of suspicion. Directors, producers, and fellow actors who had worked with him began to reassess their relationships with him. Many of them felt betrayed. Hackman had built his career on roles that showcased his integrity, his ability to play the hero, the man who always did the right thing. Now the truth was out, and it seemed like that image had been nothing more than an illusion. Hollywood, a place that thrives on public perception, was now forced to deal with the reality of who Gene Hackman truly was. The media attention was relentless. Every day, news stories about Hackman's past surfaced. Some were accurate, others were pure speculation, but the constant barrage of headlines and rumors was overwhelming. Hackman, once a private man, was now being watched by the world. It was as if his entire life had been turned upside down. No corner of his past was left untouched. Everything from his early years in Hollywood to his private retirement in Santa Fe was put under a microscope. The pressure became too much for Hackman to bear. He had spent years hiding from his past, but now that it was all out in the open, he found himself unable to escape from it. As the weeks went on, the consequences of Hackman's actions began to unfold. Legal battles were inevitable. The FBI had uncovered enough evidence to suggest that Hackman had been involved in criminal activities that were far beyond his Hollywood persona. Charges were likely, and Hackman's future, once filled with retirement plans and peaceful living, was now uncertain. The idea that he could face serious legal consequences, even prison time, became more and more likely as the evidence against him mounted. But it wasn't just the legal consequences that Hackman had to worry about. His past had become a cautionary tale, a story that would be told and retold in the media for years to come. People who had once looked up to him now saw him as a symbol of betrayal. His carefully constructed public image was shattered, and it seemed that no matter how hard he tried to move on, the past would always follow him. The actor who had once played heroic roles now found himself unable to escape the darkness that had defined his real life. Hackman's family too had to face the consequences of his actions. His children, who had grown up admiring their father, found themselves thrust into the spotlight. They were now forced to deal with the fallout of their father's actions, and their lives were forever changed. No one had prepared them for the shock of learning what Hackman had been hiding, and they were left to pick up the pieces of their own shattered perceptions of the man they thought they knew. The public scrutiny was unbearable for many of them, and it became clear that the impact of Hackman's actions would ripple through generations. As Hackman tried to keep a low profile, the pressure only increased. He had become a symbol of the dangers of hiding one's true self, of living a life built on lies. His case became a cautionary tale for others in the public eye, a warning about the consequences of keeping secrets and the dangers of trying to hide from one's past. The world was watching, and Hackman had nowhere to hide. In the end, the story of Gene Hackman's fall from grace became more than just a Hollywood scandal. It was a story about the cost of living a double life, about the consequences of pretending to be someone you're not. Hackman's rise to fame, his acting career, and his carefully crafted image had all been a lie, and now, the truth had come crashing down around him. The damage was done, and there was no going back. The fallout was far-reaching, affecting not just Hackman's career and family, but everyone who had ever looked up to him. The world had learned the hard way that even the most respected figures could have hidden lives, and in the end, secrets never stay buried forever.